This is Jim Stagnita, head coach of the PLL Whip Snakes, and you're listening to Pro Lacrosse Talk.
On Schreiber.
Sidearm whip, scores!
Now it's one. Fidel scores! Hands off for Ravel, switches hands and scores!
Carly Miller showing off those shifty skills.
Right off the bat, there's Lyle Thompson.
For a second time, the 2020 PLL champions, the Whip Snakes Lacrosse Club!
Welcome to Season 2 of the Pro Lacrosse Talk Podcast, the voice of Pro Lacrosse. I'm Hutton, he's Adam, and together we're bringing you interviews from all your favorite players and coaches, as well as news and analysis from all 4 professional lacrosse leagues. Welcome to another episode of Pro Lacrosse Talk. This is our PLL Championship recap. I'm here with my co-host Adam. Kind of sad, that we're wrapping up this 3 weeks of Pro Lacrosse. That was really fun for us to watch and cover. But we had, a good championship game that kind of was a really game of just 3 runs. But Adam, what is your takeaway? Let's start off with this championship game between the Whips and the Chaos. What are your takeaways from this game?
My first, Blaze Reardon is in fact good at playing goalie. He had crushed it this game. I know the end result isn't what he was looking for, but after that first game where Matt Gaudette chirped him, he said that didn't mess with him at all, which clearly it didn't, because after that he responded with having a fantastic season. He had 3 of the top games in terms of saves after that, and he crushed it today as well. 8 first half saves for Blaze. Unfortunately, it didn't result in a W with that late run there by the Whips going 10 straight goals between the end of the third and fourth quarter. But great performance by him, and I expect him to be named goalie of the year when those awards do come out.
Yeah, no, another great season for him. He had finished 119 saves, which, is a testament to him, being able to, stop shots, but also, kind of telling of that defense. But, for people that say, like, just because his defense is bad, that he would face a lot of, more shots, his save percentage was still .613, which was only behind the, reigning champ, Kyle Bernlohr, who was a 629 save percentage. So not only did Reardon, make the saves when he needed to, his save percentage was still just as high. So, for anyone that's kind of trying to knock him down a peg just because he faced a lot more shots than a lot of people, he still had a great save percentage as well. But yeah, another terrific season for him. That kind of brings into question too. We thought we might see a little bit of Dylan Ward this season. We didn't see him at all just because Blaze played so phenomenally throughout the whole series. So we're going to get that a little bit later, whether we see him, as the backup next year. Maybe we see them move him and get some more pieces on that defensive side. But yeah, I think it's great to start with him just because he probably would have been my MVP if the Chaos would have come out on top. Obviously a pretty ugly fourth quarter, but there's really not much he could have done. A lot of those goals were right on top of him. That defense kind of, really collapsed after really stifling them those first 3 quarters. But let's talk a little bit about what you saw from the Whip Snakes offensively. They get off to a hot 2-0 start. We think that it's going to be another long day for the Chaos. And then the Chaos kind of, keep them in check for most of those first 3 quarters. What did you see from that offense in those first 3 quarters compared to what we ended up seeing in the fourth quarter?
Yeah, I think Coach Towers really put in a good game plan to kind of stop that Whips offense early on. But as the game progressed, especially in that fourth quarter, the studs played studly, right? The guys like Zed Williams, who was the eventual MVP, the Jim Brown MVP, had 5 goals in that fourth quarter, 4 in a 2-minute span. So for those who didn't know really what Zed was like on the field before this year, they know who Zed Williams is now, right? And he had a fantastic day, still led the league in scoring beforehand and clearly leads it after, tied the record for most goals in a game, just so happens to be in the championship game, right? He had a fantastic season and a fantastic championship game and deservedly was named MVP.
Yeah, no, he was just on another level that fourth quarter. He's such a big-bodied attackman that he can just, bulldoze through people, but he's also a fantastic finisher as well. Him and Rambo had so much chemistry this season. It's amazing what they were able to accomplish, in such a short, training camp, and then to, be so productive during the season. I got to give credit to, like you mentioned, that Coach Towers' game plan was great. I think Jared Newman played really well on Rambo. He had Rambo as the matchup for most of the game. Jack Roulette, I've kind of probably been a little critical of him. He did really, really well as well. Those two guys are really great cover guys. I think, though, you saw a little bit of them missing Brody Merrill throughout this whole season, and then kind of a little bit in that fourth quarter. I think they need a quarterback on that defense. Like a team like the Whips, they have Matt Dunn, who really kind of gets everybody on the same page. Obviously, Eddie Glazner is that guy for the Redwoods. And I just think, they're kind of lacking a little bit with that quarterback of that defense. I think Newman and Rowlett can both thrive as cover guys if they get somebody in there to kind of be that vocal leader. Jesse Bernhardt was what that Chrome kind of needed this season, and you saw how well the Chrome defense played. Unfortunately, up until that final game in the playoffs, they kind of laid an egg. But again, I think it can't be understated having that guy that can kind of get everyone on the same page. Sometimes it's the goalie, and I think, again, we mentioned Blaze. Blaze is very much that vocal leader on that defense, so they kind of get away with having him. But I still think you need another pole out there, that can kind of command the defense's presence. So I look for them to maybe add that in the offseason. I don't know who that is right now, but hopefully they can find somebody to kind of, fill that void. But the Zed Williams, back to him, you can't be understated how phenomenal he played. I mean, he just went into full beast mode, put the game on his back. Zeddy Ball game came out and performed to a high level. And it was just incredible seeing, like, once they got going in that fourth quarter, I mean, they just didn't stop. And I was surprised, not that they got going, but that there was no answer from the chaos. And I think that, again, is a testament to somebody that a lot of people thought could have been the MVP as well, Joe Nardella. They just started playing make it, take it. And, he finished with a phenomenal day. He finished this series, Adam, with a .725 face-off win percentage. That is just unheard of, to dominate so much at the X. And unfortunately, at the expense of Tommy Kelly, who really did not have a good series at all. We'll get to that a little bit later. But, crazy good day for him as well. And he's, I think, the unsung hero. Again, if Zed doesn't put up 6 goals, he's probably your MVP for the whole series. But, the Whips proved that they are, the real deal. And I think, do you think we could be seeing a making of a dynasty here? I mean, they didn't have a lot of the pieces we came to, see last year with Ryan Drenner, Connor Kelly, Ben Reeves, big pieces of that offense last year. Didn't have those. Zed obviously fits in seamlessly, but a lot of guys like, Jay Carlson really stepped it up, as well as Brad Smith. So I think the Whips are going to be, scary good next season. We'll see if there's another expansion draft or, what happens with the offseason. But, this could be the makings of a dynasty.
Yeah, just credit to Coach Staggs just on the makeup of this roster, right? We talked to him during our draft show back in the offseason. And, a guy he mentioned that a lot of people forgot about was Brad Smith, right? And he clearly had a big role in their success for this championship series. And, a lot of people were skeptical about his moves potentially just because he kept his defense intact, right? And he lost so many pieces on offense. But because of guys like Brad Smith and Jay Carlson, who we'll have on the show, I don't see why they can't have future success, right? If the pieces are still there, we'll talk about potential expansion, right? Maybe they might be forced to lose a couple of those players, but clearly they're able to not rebuild but retool that offense pretty quickly just because of those pieces they had on the sidelines and those couple additions from the offseason.
Brad Smith, 8 goals, 7 assists. He was 12th in scoring. So, again, he is another unsung hero. The Whips had Rambo and Zed Williams as the top 2 in scoring. And then, you had him also in that top 12. So, and not far behind them, Mike Chanichuk, Jay Carlson, and John Haas. I think, Coach Staggs did a great job of putting the system in place and then, plugging in some new guys like the 2 we mentioned, and then Max Tuttle as well, who did really well both ways. He had a few goals in this series as well. So, I think they're going to be good next year. I mean, I made that, Bill Belichick comparison prior to this championship. I think it still holds true, if not more now, just to what Coach Staggs has been able to do. So I think going into next season, I mean, they don't really have too many weaknesses. Whether Joe Nardella can keep up this production, for a full season. We'll see. I think he can. And everything he did this year leads me to believe that he'll do the same next year. But let's talk about some of these teams then that, kind of either underperformed or, I think other than the Whips, a lot of teams still have some big weaknesses that kind of were their Achilles heel. Let's start with the Archers. A lot of people picked them to win the championship. I personally thought they would. They end up losing to that Red Hot Chaos team in the semifinals. What do you think one of their weaknesses is? Because we've lauded them as one of the top offenses. They have one of the top defenses. They still really, though, couldn't get it done, and they still couldn't get it done in the playoffs. And a lot of their games, despite winning them this year, were really close still. So I don't know if they've necessarily gotten over the hump in terms of, close games. So what did you see from them that, they'll need to fix going into next season?
Yeah, I think one thing to look at is potentially a change at the face-off X, right? I mean, their face-off play wasn't the worst in the league, but I think adding a guy potentially like a TDR in the draft would be an awesome addition to, one, create they already have a fantastic offense, right? And giving that offense even more possessions will lead to more success for a team like the Archers. So that's something that I could see them pursuing going in to next season, potentially in free agency. We'll talk about that later, or potentially in the draft. I think face-off may be a good spot for them when it comes to off-season additions.
Yeah, I agree. You had Stephen Kelly, 43% in that playoff loss. Brendan Fowler was 55%. But yeah, together they ended up finishing 6-7 in the total face-off rankings. They're behind Joe Nardella, Connor Farrell, Jake Withers, Drew Simoneau, and Trevor Baptiste. So, again, they showed some signs of good face-off play early on, but I still think they need somebody more dominant. And, you saw that. That's how the Whip Snakes were so dominant. They had a guy like Joe Nardella. That's how the Chrome were so successful for most of the season with Connor Farrell, despite, losing in that, opening round. They still dominated at the X. So their issues are a little bit different. So yeah, I agree with you. I think, they might want to look to upgrade a little bit at that position. That way they can play more make it take it. Because I think their offense is right up there with the Whip Snakes. But when you get into these games where you can't kind of put these runs together because you're not winning every face-off, it's kind of hard. And that's kind of what we saw with them against the Chaos.
Yeah, and kind of going off of that, I mean, they have a fantastic offense, right? The additions to that squad, Christian Mazzone, he was another one of those guys added in the entry draft that had a phenomenal season for his new squad. A D3 guy that we love on this pod, Josh Courier, crushed it for them as well. So there's obviously always room to improve, but that offense was pretty potent this year.
Yeah, and the defense, put it together too. They didn't really give up more than, I don't believe, 12 points. So that defense played really, really well. Matt McMahon, had a phenomenal season, as well as, the goalies they had too, and Drew Adams and Adam Gittleman. But I think, the face-off, again, is such a crucial part of this game, especially at the pros, and that's something I'd like them to address. We mentioned another guy, Connor Farrell, who's on the Chrome. That face-offs is not really their issue. And, they looked pretty good on defense for most of the season, but that's kind of what let them down in that playoff game. Where do you think they need to kind of address? They got Jesse Bernhardt, who I think is going to be quarterbacking that defense going forward, but do you think they maybe try to make a change at goalie? I know John Galloway had actually a pretty great season, for most of the series up until that playoff game, but he is getting up in age. Do they go a little bit younger at the goalie position? Do they make a move? Do they stick with him and maybe add some more experienced poles? I mean, what do you think from this Chrome team that can help them get over the hump?
Yeah, I mean, for all of those people who were saying Galloway had a bounce back year, he certainly did based off of his season in year one of the PLL. But I mean, last year was pretty much an anomaly for John Galloway. He's been a top tier goalie in every year of his professional career other than year one. So, I mean, if he wants to play, he's clearly capable of still playing. He is obviously coaching at Jacksonville, so it's worked the last 2 years for him to be able to still play at a high level. But that's a position where, like you said, he is getting up in age, and they could potentially look to move on if that's something that he wants. But I think that position's his until he wants to vacate it, to be honest with you. And going off of that a little bit, let's give a lot of credit to Coach Tim Sudan. Year one in that program with the Chrome, and he turned them around clearly as the top, the second seed going into the playoffs. I know it didn't end like he wanted. He's still looking for that championship, but credit to Coach Sudan to bring this team. Obviously, he made some tweaks here and there, but pretty similar roster in comparison to what they had in year one. And they vastly improved. So going in, I know we haven't talked about awards yet, but he'd be my Coach of the Year candidate. But credit to him, Coach Sudan. They have a lot of areas they could improve in, obviously, but I don't know if it's goalie.
No, I agree. I think, you stick with Galloway. I mean, I wouldn't surprise me if they maybe, put some pressure on him and get somebody else in there to create some competition. I think they're probably the closest to that championship in my book. Other than the Whip Snakes, it's just the fact that they ran into a hot Chaos team. And unfortunately, they put up a good fight. They just got outscored in the end. So they looked scary. I think going into this offseason, I think they should be back. And I agree with you. The Tim Sudan pick for Coach of the Year, he's probably be my pick too. Obviously, it's hard to, ignore Coach Towers from what he was able to do in the playoffs. But they did start 0-4 too. So I don't know. A little bit of recency bias there. Kind of got to look at the whole series, and if you're looking at the whole series, I'd probably go Tim Sudan as well. That kind of brings us though to the Chaos. They got hot on offense. They decide to go, move on from Connor Fields, at least, from starting him, and they, didn't really miss a beat once they did that. Curtis Dixon was a godsend for them this season. Austin Stotts played really, really well. Josh Byrne performed like we thought he would later in the year. I think they might need some more help maybe at the midfield. Jake Ficarro kind of had a little bit of a quiet season. And then, I think the face-off, they really struggled there. And then obviously the defense. So even though they did make it to the championship, I think they still have a lot of work to do. Do you think they could maybe go face-off with their pick? They have a lot of picks in this upcoming draft. They have a first-rounder, they have 2 second-rounders, and then 2 third-rounders in addition to their 4th-rounder. So that's a lot of picks. They could maybe even move up the draft board a little bit if they want. But where do you think their most glaring weakness is?
Yeah, I could see them improving at the face-off X, similar to what we mentioned with the Archers. You mentioned, too, in kind of our discussion about the championship, the potential addition on the defensive side of the ball is an area where they could definitely improve as well. So 2 weaknesses I see from that standpoint. But, I mean, look at that offense. I mean, you didn't even mention Dane Smith, who had a really strong year, obviously, and Josh Byrne, too. We haven't mentioned his name. We haven't talked about his highlight reel goal from the semifinals against the Archers. A lot of people were saying that should be the logo for the league going forward, right? So, I mean, Austin Stotts, you mentioned. Miles Thompson had a goal in the championship game. They are loaded on that offensive side of the ball, and they didn't play Connor Fields, right? So, I mean, I think improvements at the defensive end, obviously not in goal. But, I mean, they have arguably going to be the 2-time reigning goalie of the year, and they had a goalie who I thought arguably was better than him as the backup all season. So obviously Blaze played out of his mind. I think Dylan Ward's a top goalie in the world still too. We didn't see him a second of play this year, and he could be a potential trade piece going forward, right? To add in one of those areas of need.
Yeah, no, absolutely. We'll get to that a little bit later, but yeah, you got the 2 trade chips right there in Connor Fields and Dylan Ward, and then you have those picks. Coach Towers can make a lot of moves this offseason to really get this team in good shape going into, season 3. So we'll definitely be keeping our eye on the Chaos. Some other teams too, let's look at the 3 other teams we didn't mention, kind of where they need some help. Let's start with the Water Dogs. I think the biggest need is an identity on offense. They really didn't know what they wanted to do on offense. Kieran McCardle was the lone bright spot. He finished with 14 points in 5 games, 8 goals, 6 assists. We know what he can do. But other than that, their offenses really didn't perform to the level that we thought they'd be capable of. Cuccinello only had 3 goals, 2 assists. If he's going to be their X guy, they're going to, need a lot more production from him. Ben Reeves only finished with 3 assists. Westberg, 1 goal, 4 assists. Ryan Drenner, 3 goals, 1 assist. So they're going to need a lot more from that group. I'm wondering if, maybe they're the ones that try to get in on the Connor Fields sweepstakes, and then they move some pieces. Maybe they move Cuccinello or a Ryan Drenner who didn't play in the playoff game at all. But I think they need to develop an offensive identity. They need to go back to the drawing board with what they want to be. And I think that's what really, really hurt them this season. They have some talented players at the midfield, Connor Kelly, Zach Currier, Ben McIntosh, but they just did not look like they knew what they wanted to do on the offensive side of the ball. And then, in cage, they kind of struggled here or there. Whether we'll see Cipriano or DeLuca start next season, that's another, big question mark. So for an expansion squad, they certainly have the talent, but they certainly have a lot of questions going into it. And then the Redwoods actually looked really, really good. Despite that loss against the Whipsnakes, they could have easily been in the championship themselves. I think, though, you really saw them miss Jules Henningberg. I think that attack struggled without him. I think, he is that leader on that offense. And that's no disservice to, Ryder Garnsey. I think Clark Peterson played pretty well. So did Gleason for what he was given. But, they moved Brent Adams to attack. And I think he's a guy that needs to stay at the midfield. Not that, they certainly did well when he was at attack. I'm not going to knock the move by Coach Nat St. Laurent, but I definitely think if they get Jules back, they could be scary. And maybe they add one more offensive threat, at the midfield as well. We saw Miles Jones and Sergio Perkovic, hit those 2-pointers, but their offensive efficiency really wasn't that great. So I definitely think they need Henningberg to be inserted back into this lineup. Hopefully he stays healthy and is able to get past this condition. Anything else from the Redwoods or the Water Dogs that you think in particular needs to be addressed?
Yeah, first with the Water Dogs, the play of BJ Grill on the defensive side was an awesome, not necessarily surprise for many people, but an awesome thing to see for that Water Dogs defense going forward. And then you mentioned the offensive efficiency for the Redwoods. They had the lowest shooting percentage in all the league and led the league in 2-point goals. So they really relied on that 2-point shot. Sergio Perkovic had more 2-point goals than any other team, which is kind of ridiculous. They doubled up in 2-point goals any other team. The Woods had 10 2-point goals, while the Water Dogs had 5. So they really relied heavily on that 2-point shot, which I think potentially really did them in. Obviously, they were so close to making it to the championship, but I think that's from an offensive proficiency side of things, somewhere they certainly could improve in. But who knows? The Golden State Warriors really blew up by making so many more threes, right? And that was a big move in the NBA. We could see next year a move to more 2-point shots going forward potentially.
No, I think you bring up a great point, because I think one of the best shooters in all of college lacrosse and now potentially in the pro game, and Mac O'Keefe, is in that draft board. So I think you will see some teams prioritize, and I mentioned Ryan Drenner a little bit too. I think if he can kind of increase his range a little bit, he's going to make himself a little bit more valuable, either for the Water Dogs or for, a potential other team. We'll get that a little bit later. But yeah, I think that's a great point on how the Redwoods showed that, being proficient from the 2-point arc can keep you in games and win you games despite not having, an overall great offense. So I think you definitely see some teams prioritize where you definitely want, the Whipsnakes have Mike Chanichuk. Obviously the Redwoods have Jones and Sergio Perkovic. I think you're going to see more teams prioritize, hey, we need a guy that can shoot from long range. Maybe the Atlas try to make sure that Ryan Brown is that guy. We'll get to that a little bit later. But now that I mentioned the Atlas, a lot of things that, they need to fix on this team. I don't know if it's too many cooks in the kitchen. Kind of saw the same woes as last year, but they do have that number 1 overall pick. So where do you think they should prioritize this offseason?
It's a tough one, they were a team of such runs, right? They had really strong success from a variety of positions. Clearly Jack Kincannon really held them together.
Mm-hmm.
He ended, I think, with a 57% save percentage, really bailed them out, especially one-on-one situations. He had another strong year. So I'll see him coming back in cage. And they had some success on the rookie side too, right? They added Brian Costabile, who obviously had that one massive game that was on nationally televised. They added a guy in the entry draft in Craig Chick, who had a solid season for them. But when it comes to it, I think the defensive side of the ball really bolstering the depth at that position could be something that they see as a need going forward potentially.
I'd like to see Aiden Hines maybe get the call up. He wasn't on their travel roster, but they did draft him. He did commit to the PLL. Maybe you use him instead of Callan Robinson. They used Unterstein a lot in a variety of ways. I'd like, to keep him more the short stick defensive mid. Not that he can't play pole, but I definitely think they need another guy there. Maybe you move Chick down to close defense. He's certainly been able to play that in the past, both college and his 1 year in the pros with the Rattlers as well. But yeah, defense definitely needs some work. I think the midfield too, they have some talented O guys. I think you need a two-way guy. Obviously they added Costabile, but you need to add a few more two-way guys there. And I think you saw that the teams that did have the two-way guys, it really made a difference.
Thank you for listening to another episode of the Pro Lacrosse Talk Podcast. Today I want to talk to you about our sponsor, Anchor. We've been using Anchor for the Pro Lacrosse Talk Podcast since the very start. Anchor gives you everything you need in one place, and better yet, it's free. They allow you to easily record and edit your podcast, and once it's published, they send it out to all the major networks such as Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, and many more. They also connect you with advertisers so you can start making money from your podcast right away. So if you're thinking about starting a podcast today, download the Anchor app or go to anchor.fm to get started. Today, I also want to talk to you about Design Tree. On our Design Tree store, we have several t-shirt designs like the Pro Lacrosse Talk tee I'm wearing today, our Blast Lacrosse shirt, Cross's Medicine shirt, and many more designs on the way. Design Tree is also home to hundreds of other t-shirt designs in the realm of sports and pop culture. To help support the podcast, please consider checking out our Design Tree store at dsgntree.com/pro-lacrosse-talk and grab a shirt today.
That kind of brings us now to these off-season moves. We mentioned that we could see Connor Fields maybe move, and that really depends on, too, whether we have expansion. So we don't know if we're going to have an 8th expansion team. They didn't really hint at it. Again, we don't know what their financial situation is after this season, too. Hopefully they're in still good shape. I think, that they are, but that might play into whether they add an expansion team or not. So where do you see from this league going forward? Do you think they add an expansion team? Again, there's a lot still up in the air with sports in general, but do you think you see them add an 8th team? Or do you think, maybe they stick to 7 going into next season?
I mean, either is possible, right? Some people were not wanting that Water Dogs expansion franchise after only one season. That didn't seem to be people's thoughts after the season, right? After all of the awesome stuff that happened in the offseason with the expansion drafts, all of the content. I mean, whenever you add a team, more content is created, more back and forth between fans in the league is created, and it only adds positive connections between new fans, potential fans, and the PLL as a whole. So I'd be completely fine with it. It adds some more enticing seeds for us to cover, obviously. But I certainly could see them sticking with the 7-team model for at least one more season going forward. But obviously there is a lot up in the air going to next year. Hopefully, I'm sure they're looking to get back to the weekly model where they're on screens, maybe not as in a condensed version as it was this season. So hoping to have a longer season, and obviously creates more drama the more teams you have. The one thing the league doesn't want to do is kind of decrease the competitive balance of the league. And as you saw, the team that finished in last place was in the championship. So that competitive balance is absolutely still there. So if they can keep that competitive balance, add some more intrigue with adding a new team, hopefully you might like the new name of the next expansion franchise a little bit more, but I don't see why not. The talent is there. If we do see some more movement from the college, you saw, especially there weren't many rookies this year, right? I know there was a lot of rookies that were considered rookies coming over from the MLL, obviously. But the talent's there to add another team. You saw a goalie in a guy like Dylan Ward be on the bench the whole time. Why not add a squad for him to start?
No, I agree. I think it's a must, really. I mean, obviously you got to look at the financials if it makes sense, because you add another 18-man roster or whatever it is. You got to pay those guys. Sure. But yeah, I think it's a must because we'll get into some of these off-season trades that we'd like to see or changes of scenery. Connor Fields, I don't know where he really ends up other than maybe the Water Dogs if you don't add an expansion team. I mean, he's kind of that quarterback of that offense, or he was before they benched him. So every team kind of has that locked up. You got Matt Rambo for the Whip Snakes. The Chaos don't really have that, but they make it work because they got Josh Byrne, they got Austin Stotts, they got Miles Thompson. That's really just how their offense runs. They clearly showed that they didn't need him. Water Dogs, maybe. I think they could benefit from adding him. Atlas, they have Rob Pennell. Jules Henningberg, when he's back, he's out for the Redwoods. You got Jordan Wolf with the Chrome. There's really not many teams I could see Connor Fields ending up other than the Water Dogs. So that's why I hope there is an expansion franchise. Again, like you mentioned, I hope they choose a better name. Maybe don't let Barstool choose this name, please. Maybe let the fans choose it. Put out feelers and see what the fan input is. And then automatically, if you choose a fan pick name, you're going to have people that already feel a connection to it because they helped choose that name. That's just my opinion. We won't get into that. But I think that kind of is, the next logical step because there is so much talent coming out of this college draft. It's quite honestly probably going to be the most talented because you have people that are coming back after their 5th season in college. So, yeah, I definitely think and hope that they add another team and, more teams is better. And I think, like you said, the parity is still going to be there. I don't think we have to worry about that from the PLL at all. I think the Water Dogs, despite going, 1-5, the Water Dogs going 1-4, they were still very competitive. Full season on their belt, I think they would have done a little bit better. So, yeah, we'll see for sure. You mentioned Dylan Ward. Where do you think you'd like to see him end up, if not an expansion franchise?
Yeah, if Coach Copeland, I know I'm not sure what he's going to decide on from a goalie perspective, but if he wants to add another Canadian to the roster, I could see Dylan Ward being an awesome addition, right? I joked on Twitter, wouldn't it be fitting he goes there? They can be called the Water Dogs. It only makes sense.
Yeah, no, that would be, I think, a great fit for him. I think every other, team really has the goalie position locked up. You could still see Dylan Ward maybe split time with one of those goalies if you really like DeLuca or Cipriano as well. But I think that would be the most logical spot. Maybe you see the Chrome shake it up if they really don't want to go with Galloway. I don't see that happening given Sudan and Galloway's history and the fact that Galloway did play really, really well this season. I think that's the most logical step. And again, hopefully it maybe is an expansion team that he ends up on. But, I think Coach Towers, given what he's done, just picking Dylan Moore despite having goalie of the year Blaze Reardon, I think maybe you see him protected still so that he can use him as trade bait. We'll see. Another player that I would like a change of scenery is Ryan Drenner, who didn't play at all in that playoff game. I don't know if he was hurt. We didn't really get any, information on why he didn't play, but he really struggled this season. And I think it was because, again, there was just too many weapons on that Water Dogs team without really somebody quarterbacking that. I really expected more out of Cuccinello, but he didn't really perform up to par. So maybe you see Ryan Drenner moved. And I think, Chrome would be a good spot for them. The Chrome, if they don't get Mac O'Keefe in this draft, I think could use another outside shooter. Gaudette did really well as their crease attackman, and he obviously can shoot too. So I'm not trying to, do a disservice to Gaudette. But I think you add another, outside threat there. And if Ryan Drenner can shoot from range, that could be their 2-point threat there. Because, when they were trying to come back against the Chaos, there really wasn't anybody in my mind that I thought, okay, you got to get the ball. If you're the Redwoods, you got to get the ball to Miles Jones or Sergio Perkovic or even Joe Walters to hit it too, to get back in this game. With the Chrome, I was like, they're better off, maybe just, trying to get some, hit some singles, as we say. So maybe if they add a long ball threat, it could be Ryan Drenner. And then, another hot take for someone on the move. We mentioned the Atlas's problems. Could we see Paul Rabel get traded or go somewhere else, whether it's an expansion team? Does he go to the Water Dogs? I think he's still got a lot left in the tank. He obviously did not have a very good shooting season. But, if he's willing to move and if, Coach Rubio wants to move him, expansion franchise might be nice. I think the Archers could use him as well. The Archers, again, are pretty good at the midfield. I think face-off is their first priority, but it wouldn't hurt to add a guy of Rabel's caliber. Do you think Rabel leaves the Atlas, or do you think I'm just talking nonsense right now?
I think it's a little more nonsense. It's a good topic, but I think he's a Bull through and through. He talked ad nauseum about how excited he was to get a guy like Rubio to coach his squad. he keeps hyping them up. I don't foresee him going anywhere or finishing his career with anyone other than the Bulls.
All right, I know it might be a little bit of nonsense there. I just have to throw it out there. I have to. But there's some other guys too that I know we talked about, like Joel Tinney, kind of underutilized. I think he could be a good fit on some team. Maybe the Chaos add him. Another Canadian there. Ben Reeves, another guy on the Water Dogs. It's disappointing to maybe see him on a third team in 3 years because he is so talented. But another team could definitely use him. We don't know what his situation is in terms of med school. Because it sounds like another guy going to med school like Ty Warner this might have been his last year, unfortunately. And then Tommy Kelly too, I think Towers is loyal to him, but if he wanted to add some competition or, make a switch there, I think the potential is there as well. And then another thing to kind of keep your eye on this offseason is Ryan Brown and Eric Law. The Atlas kind of were a little overpopulated on that attack. You have Rob Pennell, Eric Law, Ryan Brown, Chris Cloutier. They kind of struggled to get all those guys in rhythm. And those are all talented players. So I don't know if they move on from any of them, but, you could get a lot in return if you do decide to move maybe an Eric Law or a Ryan Brown. Don't see that happening. Just something, again, to throw out there. These are more of our hot takes, obviously, like my Rabel one. But, again, it's hopefully going to be an interesting offseason. That kind of brings us to the topic, too, of what we'll see in terms of free agency. This is going to be a big offseason for pro field lacrosse because we're under the impression that a lot of these players sign 2-year deals with the PLL. So we saw a lot of extensions signed, but you could see some movement, whether players decide to go back to the MLL, maybe they didn't get that much time over these 2 years. I don't think it's going to be too many big names. Maybe we see some more big names from the MLL come over to the PLL. That's definitely going to be an interesting storyline to watch. But what do you think we'll see from this free agency? Because to me right now, the way the PLL has it set up, there really aren't free agents. You sign with the league and then you're on that team and then you got to re-up with the league, but you're still on that roster. So a guy like Connor Fields, if he only signed a 2-year deal, he's still technically on the Chaos, and Coach Towers can move him if he decides to re-sign another deal with the PLL. Again, this is all speculation. We don't know who's signed what, other than those that have been announced that they have signed extensions. And even the extensions, most of the time they said what year they're signed through, but some of them didn't. So, again, this is kind of speculating. I don't know if we're going to really see a true free agency, but wouldn't it be kind of cool if we saw, okay, Connor Fields' 2-year deal is up, re-signs with the PLL, but now he's a free agent and can kind of choose which team he goes to. Do you think we could see any of that, Adam, or do you think it's going to be more of, players just re-signing with the league and then getting moved depending on what team they're currently on?
Sure. I mean, I mentioned earlier about the enticement of off-season moves and kind of hyping the league in an extended period where there won't be lacrosse, other than obviously the NLL where a lot of those guys are playing. It add a lot of controversy. It add a lot of intrigue to have something like a free agency. We mentioned off pod too. If players do move from one league to the other, how many years are we going to have an entry draft where players coming from the MLL are going to the PLL, right? Are those players now going to be potential free agents signing with the PLL and going to whichever team that best fits them? So it'll be interesting. I'd love to see it. I'd love to have some more parity when it comes to, or clarity when it comes to what those deals look like. Obviously it'd be great to know salary numbers and all that from an intrigue perspective, but just the ability to know players are free agents. They have the ability to sign with other teams, go where they wish, where they feel like their game fits best would be super interesting and add another complex layer to already really intriguing league.
Yeah, no, I definitely would like to see a little bit more transparency because you saw after the entry draft, a few guys signed with the Water Dogs, where the Water Dogs just able to sign those guys because they're an expansion franchise. You had the waiver wire, which also had some big names, Obviously, they did it the right way with the waiver wire because Water Dogs started off with the top pick and it went down the list. They were able to get Jake Withers that way. But those guys were technically free agents coming over. The entry draft was cool, but like you said, it was more kind of just a nice way for them to add these, 12 guys to a team. They could have easily just had them sign with whatever team they really wanted. They decided to do it in an entry draft way, which was, I think, smart. But also it's more of just, another way to, generate buzz around the league and show, hey, these guys are coming over. So It definitely, I think, was necessary this year, but how many years are we going to do it? I don't know. And I think that's a great point to bring up. So we're definitely intrigued by that. You guys want to definitely stick with us this off season because it's sure to be in for a good one. And again, with these deals potentially being up, will we see a big name go back to the MLL, or will we see a big MLL guy go to the PLL? I will have to see. Right now, it's going to be, I think a lot more is up in the air now than there was last year. Last year, you kind of saw the writing on the wall for some of these MLL guys. This year, it's a little bit more up in the air. So we'll definitely be interested to see that. I want to wrap up, though, with betting, because that was, I think, a great aspect of this championship series that we definitely enjoyed. Obviously, we had Dan Newbert on for our playoff preview. We loved talking betting with him. Me and you, Adam, weren't really that big of bettors. We kind of got a little bit more into it as the series progressed. And some of the interesting trends to come out of this series are going to be interesting to watch going into the next season. The over-under trend, I think, is one to definitely watch. The under hit 16 out of 20 games. I think sportsbooks kind of got smarter as they went along. Those 4 games that hit the over came later in the season. So I definitely think they're going to be a little bit smarter about setting those totals next year. That was something interesting to watch. And then, teams covering the point spread. The Whips covered 5 of 6 games. Water Dogs covered 3 of 5 games, despite only winning one of those games. And then Archers did not do a very good job of covering. So it added a whole nother layer that I think was really interesting and hopefully brought in a lot more new fans to the game as well. The fact that you can bet on the games is definitely going to attract a new audience that is great for the pro lacrosse to grow. Unfortunately, me and you are, teams to win in the future odds didn't come true. I had the Water Dogs and Archers. You had the Water Dogs. Neither of the teams won. We ended up losing money out on that, but it was still fun to, be able to follow those teams. What were your takeaways from betting in year 1 for the PLL?
Yeah, the first and foremost, the over-under you mentioned, the 16 games going the under. I mean, based off of those odds, I was surprised that the lines were that high for the overs. I mean, if you looked at trends, I know the season is completely different in comparison to year 1 based off of pretty much everything, right? But the lines that they started at, just looking at last year's statistics, you should have bet the under every single time based off of last year's statistics. So the fact that 16 of the games went under didn't surprise me on the lines. Now, like you mentioned, I expect those lines to be completely different going into next year based off of 2 years of data, despite it being substantially different scenarios. So that's super interesting. So, and I'm excited, like you said, hopefully this added new fans. It clearly did based off of just kind of Lack's Twitter, the new names that popped up there in a variety of different ways. It added new fans, certainly. I'm excited to see it continually grow. I'm excited to hopefully have the lines be a little bit different and the prop bets be a little bit more intricate going into next year too. I'm excited for a lot of the betting side of things, but first and foremost for the addition of new fans.
Yeah, no, and we got live betting for a couple games towards the end too, which was kind of cool to see. Yeah, and I agree. I think right now betting is in a weird spot because usually when you look at sports betting, they know the ins and outs of the NFL, MLB. And so you really got to, follow the data with that and really got to know your stuff. With the lacrosse side, it kind of pays to be a lacrosse fan first, whereas I think it's going to start to progress where you got to kind of take the emotion out of it, watching the games. You got to really look at the data like Dan, Newbert said, to kind of make your decisions. And I think that's still true. But you did benefit a little bit from knowing these teams pretty well, because I think if you're a lacrosse fan and you watch the PLL in year 1, you actually knew more than these sports books right out of the gate. That's going to change. They have a whole off season to kind of get their research team in line. So you may not have as much of an advantage going into year 2 of PLL betting, but it's definitely something to watch. And we're definitely going to be talking about it as the off season progresses, even leading up to that. But yeah, that's kind of our take on betting. We launched the Fantasy Lacrosse podcast for that very reason, not only to talk fantasy lacrosse, but also betting. We're going to still talk about it on the Pro Lacrosse Talk podcast, but it's going to give us another opportunity to kind of get experts on this show to kind of talk about the betting side of things. We had Jake Watts come on to talk about kind of where the PLL stats can kind of help you make informed betting decisions. We're going to have a lot of other people come on as guests as well that's something we have in the works. PLT is not going anywhere. We are still going to be bringing tons of coverage. NLL draft is coming up. We cannot wait to cover that. We'll have plenty of previews leading into the NLL draft, as well as, going into the season itself. We're still very passionate about the women's game. Just even though the unfortunate news that the WPLL is shutting down doesn't mean women's lacrosse is dead. They're definitely looking to partner with Athletes Unlimited to hopefully have some sort of showcase. We're going to be monitoring this story as it develops, but we're still going to have interviews with the women players. It's still a big point of emphasis for both of us, if not, even more so now that they don't have a season, because there's tons of talented women players out there that need to be spotlighted still. And hopefully they can get something together for a season next year. I'm very optimistic, but it is very unfortunate what happened with the WPLL. And then, we got some more betting coverage, as I mentioned. Player film breakdowns are in the works. We're going to have our top side plays coming up. So PLT is not going anywhere. We're going to have a lot of off-season coverage, and then, we're going to hit the ground running with the NLL. But anything else that excites you coming in the works from PLT going into this off-season, Adam?
Yeah, I mean, first and foremost, you mentioned the NLL is going to be here before you know it, fingers crossed. That draft is a couple weeks away, September 17th for the NLL. Looks like Jeff Teat is going to be the first overall pick, as long as there isn't a trade or whatever the case may be. He looks like he'll be heading to New York, the New York Riptide, which I'm excited to see him with the addition of Callum Crawford for the Riptide that we didn't mention yet. But we'll be talking soon about all the offseason moves for the NLL, the future of the PLL and MLL, what that looks like for player movement. So I can't wait. This is going to be one of the most exciting off seasons for pro lacrosse as a whole. I know it was a sprint of a season for both the MLL and PLL fans. It looks like it's going to be a sprint of an off season with how much information you guys are going to be getting on a daily basis from us and those leagues.
No, absolutely. And I just want to give a shout out to all our contributors too. Yep. We had a lot of people step in and join our team and step up, going in this championship series. To everyone that, wrote the recaps. It was great. We couldn't have done it without them. So I just want to, give a shout out to everybody that helped with that. Dan Arestia, our Pro Lacrosse Talk insider, as we say, was a huge help. David Wildman has been cranking out content since March, really. And, he's taken on a lot of these news pieces. Isaac Berkey came on. He was doing our fantasy focus videos. Nicole Weaving doing the quick stick every week, and then the quick stick tap after every day for the games, I think was just great content. Really appreciate what she's doing. Nick Zaroya came on as a contributor. He's a fellow lacrosse podcaster. He's the Lax Collective podcast. We're going to have him on our show sometime this off season as well, do a little collaboration with that. He was a huge help. Mark Lang, he wrote a lot of our NLL pieces. You'll see some more of those, hopefully, with the updates of what these teams are doing in the off season. Alex Seagal came on, really added another layer of analysis to our coverage. And then Brian Andrews with our PLT win probability engine. We really appreciated him coming on pretty late in the game and building that. So shout out to all those people. Really appreciate their hard work and effort. We owe a lot to them, and they're going to be helping us continue coverage. We're not going to stop. We really aren't. Last year we had a whole season and we didn't really miss a beat. Since then, we kept putting out podcast episodes. It's going to be the same, going forward. We have one with Jay Carlson coming up that you mentioned, Adam. We're really excited about that. He was a guy that had a breakout season. So the content keeps coming. So we hopefully you guys stay with us. We hope you enjoyed this episode, and hopefully you keep tuning in to Pro Lacrosse Talk.
Today, I also want to talk to you about Design Tree. On our Design Tree store, we have several t-shirt designs like the Pro Lacrosse Talk tee I'm wearing today, our Blast Lacrosse shirt, Cross's Medicine shirt, and many more designs on the way. Design Tree is also home to hundreds of other t-shirt designs in the realm of sports and pop culture. To help support the podcast, please consider checking out our Design Tree store at dsgntree.com/pro-lacrosse-talk and grab a shirt today.